Acts chapter 20, verses 1 to 12. Paul's journey to Greece, and then another section about a young man called Eutychus. It begins in verse 1. Metade to pavsaste ton thorivon, and after the tumult ceased that was caused in the last section by Demetrius the silversmith, going to the theater and raising a ruckus, proskelesammenos o Pavlos tus mathitas, Paul, having called the disciples, ke aspasamenos, and having saluted, saying goodbye, exilthe porevthine eistin Macedonian, went forth to go into Macedonia. Let's go up to our map. Now, on the third journey, he's down here in Ephesus, so he wants to go up to Macedonia. So this Macedonia is in Greece. Ephesus is in today's Turkey. Macedonia was a section of Greece. It gets to be kind of confusing because you think of Greece as the whole area, but at that time it was broken up into sections. Achaia, where it was just generally called Greece, and Elene, and that was where Athens and Corinth were, right over here. But Macedonia was up north, where Philippi and Thessalonica were the two main cities. But today, an area that was next to Greece, east of Greece, decided to call themselves Macedonia. So it caused a big ruckus 15 or 20 years ago. Now, Paul is going to go back up here into Macedonia. It doesn't give us an exact itinerary of every place he went. Let's go back to our text. So he saluted them, and then verse 2, Vielthon they tameri kina, and then having gone through those parts, so those parts were probably in Macedonia, Philippi, and then Thessaloniki. Ke parakalesas avtus logo polo, and having comforted them by much communication, ilthon eistin Elada, that is Greece, went down into Elada, probably Athens or Corinth. It doesn't say which one. But he did pick up some traveling companions that were from Thessalonica up above in Macedonia during this time. In verse 3, Pisas te minas tris, and having spent 3 months in Greece, genomenis avto epivulis hypo ton Iudeon, with a plot existing against him by the Jews, melonti anangaste eistin Syria, and being about to embark into Syria, so he was going to go back to Antioch, ageneto gnomi to hypostrephin dia Macedonias, he became of the opinion to return through Macedonia. So instead of going back and taking a boat to Antioch, right north of Jerusalem in Israel, he went back over to Macedonia. In verse 4, Sinipato they avto akri tis asias sopatros Eos, and accompanied him as far as Asia, Sopator, a Berean. This is the only place it mentions this Sopater, unless it was in Romans 16:21, where it calls traveling companion Sospator. So it may be the same person. He was a Jew from Berea, which was fairly close to Thessaloniki. And then Aristarchus, ke Secundos, and of Thessalonians, I missed that. And then Thessaloniki, Keon they, Aristarchus ke Secundos, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus. And Thessaloniki was there up in Macedonia. And Aristarchus is also mentioned in Acts 19. We had already went through that. And then we'll see him again in chapters 27 and 28. And Colossians 4 and the book of Philemon. So he's named probably more than anyone outside of maybe Timothy. He was a Jew from Thessalonica. And so he ends up entering a ship with Paul and Luke, and then the ship ends up being shipwrecked on Malta in Acts 28, and then eventually he becomes a fellow prisoner of Paul in Rome, and that's mentioned in Colossians 4:10. Now, Secundus is only mentioned here. He's probably a non-Jewish person from Thessaloniki. We know he's from Thessalonica because it says that right here. And then Gaius, Derveos, and Gaius of Derbe. Gaius mentioned like 4 different times. Whether it's the same one or not, it probably is. Acts 19 and chapters 19 and 20, Romans 16:23, 1 Corinthians 1:14, and 2 John. And he was from Derbe, which was over closer to Tarsus, to the west, quite a ways, southwest, when they were in Ephesus. And he was probably not Jewish, because it says that he was baptized by Paul in Corinth when he was there. And then Timotheos, which we have the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy, who is probably mentioned the most. Asiani, they, and of Asia, Tychicus, Trophimos, Tychicus and Trophimus. Tychicus is also mentioned in Ephesus 6, Colossians chapters 1 and 4, 2 Timothy chapter 4, and Titus chapter 1. He's probably not a Jew, but from Ephesus, because he is from Asia, it says here, and that would be Turkey today. He reported to the Ephesian assembly on the news of Paul at different times. And Trophimos is mentioned in Acts 21, next chapter, and 2 Timothy 4. He was also a non-Jew, probably from Ephesus, because it says from Asia. And later we hear that he was left sick at a place called Miletus. Now going to 5. Uti proelthontes emenon imas in Troadi. These having gone forward, waited for us in Troas. Now Troas, Paul was in Greece, so Troas is over in Asia. So they went forward. Let's go back to our map. So Troas is here. So they went over to Troas. Paul was still in Macedonia. In verse 6, emis they exaplevsamen. Now here we have the we, which many people think is Luke, is now writing this book of Acts. He is a physician, if this is who he was. And metat tas imeros ton azimon, after the days of the unleavened breads, apo Philippon, from Philippi. Philippi was, that's where they sailed from. That was over in Macedonia. And ke ilthomen pros aftus istin Troada, and came to them in Troas. Acri meron pente, and 5 days. I think that's what it means, that it took him that long to get across to Troas. From Philippi, and Neapolis was the seaport. Earlier in the second, I believe it was the second journey of Paul, he went this way before. And then the tripsamen imeras epta, of which we spent 7 days. Now it changes to Eutychus raised from the dead, getting away from all the geography. Verse 7, and they timia ton salvaton, and on day 1 of the Sabbaths, synigmenon ton mathiton, klasse arton, the disciples having been gathered together. Now that's synigmenon, where we get the synagogue is similar to that, to break bread, eat together, talk about Jesus. O Pavlos, the allegato aftis, Paul reasoned with them, melon exiene te epavrion, being about to exit the next day. So they're gathered together, and he's going to tell them what he's going to do, I suppose. Paretine te ton logon makri mesonik tiu, but extended the word until midnight. Wow, that's a long time to go through the word, what he was talking about. Verse 8, Ison they lampadas ikane into, and there were a fit amount of lamps in the eparo u men synigmeni, upper room of which we were having been gathered together. So they're up in this room, and it says in verse 9, kathimenos they tis neanias, and there was sitting down a certain young man. He's called a child later in verse 12. Anomati evtikos, by name Eutychus, only place we hear of him. Epi tis theoridos, by the window. Kataferomenos, ipno vathi, having been sunken in a deep sleep. Now we're used to having windows right next to the wall, but those houses had wide walls made out of bricks and different types of clay material. So they were fairly wide. So you could actually sit inside of the window there and look out. And this is what this young man was doing, a child. And then vielegomenu to Pavlu epi plion, and with Paul reasoning for a long time, katanenchthis apo to ipnu, having sunken from the sleep, not Paul, but the young man, epison apo to tristegu kato. He fell from the 3rd level to below. So it would be 15, 16 feet or more. Ke irthi nekros, and he was lifted up and dead. So he fell and was dead. Verse 10, katavas they, and having descended, O Pavlos epepisan avto, Paul fell upon him. So having descended, so Paul was up somewhere talking to the people, down, I suppose, and so it's a big building if he's on the 3rd floor. Okay, sim perilavon, and having wrapped around him, Epe said, Mi thoroviste, do not make a disruption. Igor psiki avtu and avto estin, for his life is in him. Verse 11, anavaste ke klassus arton, then having ascended and having broken bread, went back to eating, ke gevsamenos, and having tasted, f ikanon te omilisas, and for a fit amount of time having consorted, akris avgis utos exilthen, he went forth. Igagonde tom pedha zonta, and they brought the child alive, ke parakletheson u metrios, and were comforted not moderately. Again, that form of saying not something, but it actually is they were comforted greatly. So now, right up here, him having wrapped around him, we see in 2 Kings 4, verses 34 to 35, Elisha the prophet was staying with a woman, a rich family, and she had, they gave him a little room as he came by. She asked her husband if that would be okay, and yes, the holy man and his servant. So he had this room with a bed and a table, and so then he asked his servant, what would this woman like that I could do for her? And he told her, well, she wants to have a child. She hasn't been able to. And so he announced to her that she was going to have the child. Child was born. And then later, he was working out in the field. Maybe he was 10 or 12 years old, and he got a headache, fever, and collapsed, and they took him into the house, and he died. And so, but Elisha was not there. He had left. So the woman told her servant to go after Elisha, but then she got a horse or a donkey and saddled it and took off and came to Elisha and told him. And Elisha's servant didn't want her to come and talk to this prophet, because that I don't know, some reason for the custom that they had was not to associate with women, especially if they were married. And Jesus was sort of the same thing at the well in Samaria with the woman. And Elisha told his servant that's okay. Says something problem with her. She's got a big problem. So she came and told him that the son had, why did you give me what I wanted, but then you taken him away? And so he went back and he laid on him 7 times, breathed on his face, and so forth. And the young man rose from the dead. So we had that also happening in the Old Testament, in the book of 2 Kings 4, 34 to 35. Our next section now, setting sail for Jerusalem.